This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 706 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. The Week 10 NFL Sunday Million is officially live on FanDuel. Showcase your NFL knowledge and construct your best 9-player roster while staying under the salary cap. Then follow along using FanDuel's live scoring feature to compete for your share of $1.4 million in cash prizes, including a $250,000 first place prize. And it's all for just $5. Sunday is approaching quickly, so head to FanDuel and submit your lineups today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. It's a 10-trend show. Let's get to them. Trend 1 this week is that JuJu Smith-Schuster is kind of happening. He had a tough start to the season, but he's currently wide receiver 21 in PPR points per game at wide receiver after finishing as a top 10 wideout in 3 consecutive games. He's averaged over 108 yards per game over his last 3. Now, his target shares remain similar during this stretch, but he's seeing slightly different usage, and not in the way that you might think. From weeks 1 through 5, JuJu had 4 15-plus air yard targets, 0.8 per game. Over his last 3, during the stretch of high-end production, he's only had 1 15-plus air yard target. His air yards per target rate has actually dropped by almost 3 full yards in and out of this split, meaning he's actually been used closer to the line of scrimmage during this productive stretch. Now, his fantasy production has been better because of touchdowns too. He scored twice in his last 3 games, and the Chiefs have seen a little bit more passing, allowing for a target per game rate increase of a little over 1. But JuJu's being used more like his usage from Pittsburgh. That may not be a bad thing, though. Trend 2 is about another wide receiver putting up low-key good numbers, and that's Allen Lazard. He's banged up, but Lazard has scored at least 11.5 PPR points per game in every single contest since week 2. He's been a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy during this stretch. He's been pretty amazing, and it feels like the fantasy community isn't giving him enough credit. He just hasn't had that blow-up game, so people aren't overly excited about him. But make no mistake, Allen Lazard should be in your fantasy lineup most weeks at this point. We saw a jump in snap share from Isaiah Spiller this past week. Back in week 7, Spiller had a 6% snap share in the Chargers offense, nothing special. Out of their bye week, though, the Chargers used Spiller more. They put him on the field on over 18% of their snaps. That resulted in a season-high 32% running back rush share. This doesn't mean a whole lot in terms of immediate production, but it does change the handcuff landscape a little bit. And rookies do tend to perform better during the second half of their first seasons. So this is definitely something to monitor and see if Spiller's role continues to grow. J.D. McKissic was out this past week with a neck injury. That allowed Antonio Gibson to hit his highest snap share since week 1. He played 58% of Washington's snaps in what was a pretty neutral game script. Gibson's now seen a double-digit percentage target share in each of his last 5 games, and he's posting respectable PPR outputs thanks to the Commanders using him more frequently as a receiver. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Antonio Gibson, he's still the most talented running back in that backfield. Kenyon Drake saw almost 83% of Baltimore's running back rushes against the Saints on Monday night. That high of a running back rush share has been hit only once since 2018 in the Baltimore offense. It seems pretty clear who the guy is in Baltimore as long as Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are sidelined. Drake has now hit 16-plus PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games. Justin Herbert has not been very good in fantasy this year. He's the QB 11 in points per game when expectations were much higher. Part of the reason for that is injuries throughout the offense, yes, but Herbert's also not pushing it down the field very frequently. On the year, he's thrown it 15 or more air yards on just 13.4% of his attempts. Last year, that number was 2 percentage points higher. During his rookie year, it was almost 4 percentage points higher. More importantly, he's only completing 39% of those throws this season. Last year's completion rate on 15-plus air yard throws, it was closer to 50%. In other words, big plays aren't happening for LA at the same rate this year. Herbert's throwing it deep less, and they're converting less. That's a huge reason for his down fantasy season. Cole Kmet hit a 20% target share for the first time this season on Sunday. He had a 22% target share. He ended up finding the end zone twice on 6 targets. From weeks 1 through 8, Kmet had about a 68% route participation in that Bears offense. In week 9, that number rose to about 80%. So his usage was a little bit better, but I don't think that we can sit here and say that Kmet is a full-blown starter or anything yet. This was his first tight end 1 performance on the year, and he's had a 14% target share this season in that offense. And it's an offense that's running the ball at the highest rate in the league. As a streamer, that's one thing. As a full-time guy in your lineup, I think it's premature to say that. I know everyone's sick of Kansas City backfield talk, but I do have to note one thing. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has now played the fewest snaps in that backfield in consecutive games. The Chiefs had some trouble running it against the Titans, so Jerick McKinnon benefited because he's the hurry-up back. But just wait for that run-heavy script. That's when we might see more Isaiah Pacheco than we've seen. They've just had a couple of rough opponents for that since we started to see the shift in backfield snaps with Clyde Edwards-Helaire not seeing as much. Chris Godwin still hasn't scored this year, but his expected touchdown total isn't as high as you'd think. Godwin has averaged over 9 targets per game. That number is actually over 10 when you remove week 1. Despite this, he's only been expected to score between 1 and 2 touchdowns so far this year based on where he's seeing his touches. Pro Football Focus's expected points model has him at 1.3 expected touchdowns because he's not being used close to the end zone. Per PFF, Godwin doesn't have a single end zone target this year. He does have 7 red zone targets and 4 targets from within the 10, but none of them have been in the end zone. Now, I'd expect that to change a little bit moving forward. We have to remember that we can't assume usage is unchanging when talking regression. It would be surprising if Godwin finishes the year without an end zone target. That just helps explain why he hasn't found the end zone yet. Now, the last trend this week is about the Jets' backfield. In week 8, which was James Robinson's first game with the Jets, he saw 36% of the team's running back rushes and a 3% target share. He played 22% of the team's snaps. From week 8 to week 9, Robinson saw his running back rush share jump by more than 12 percentage points, his target share by over 5 percentage points, and his snap share, it went from 22% to 40%. He's been dealing with a knee injury. He might not even be fully healthy yet. I think it just plays into the idea, though, that Robinson is going to be a big part of this Jets backfield. And remember, like I talked about on last week's 15 Transaction Show, the Jets have a really nice fantasy playoff schedule for running backs. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out LateRound.com. Otherwise, I will talk to you tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.